Hello, Jane Roxana here, back again. This is my 7th show on creation, day 4. We're going to be talking mostly about our solar system, the sun, moon, and stars. So first of all, we're going to read our verse, Genesis 1:14 through 19. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the 4th day. But wait a minute, you say. God already created the light to divide the light from the darkness. Okay, we're talking about 2 separate things here. Now, on my 3rd show, we talked about what exactly was light, or what is a ray of light made of. And it's talked about it both being a wave and a particle. And even in the article, it stated that light itself is a paradox. So what are we talking about here? Obviously, we are talking about the actual created formations that give off light. So what was possibly the light before? Because it did say morning and evening. So was there some sort of light shining on the earth to produce a morning and evening effect? Well, first of all, let's go back and remind you that even evolutionists have a way of there being light before the stars, and they call that the cosmic microwave background. Whether that is what we're talking about here, and possibly God had gathered all that before he spread that out, or what, that's not what I believe, because of this verse that I'm going to read now. It is Revelations 21:23, and it states, "And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof." I believe it is possible, since God had to create the darkness, because he is light and in him is no darkness. So he created this darkness. And he created a way for the light to go through the darkness. And I believe that first light that he used was himself, his glory shone upon the earth the first 3 days of creation. Then when he decided to create the sun, moon, and stars to replace that, then he used that to divide the light from the darkness. My theory only, well, I don't know if it's just my theory. I'm pretty sure that people have that theory. Anyways, there you go. So you can take it or leave it as it is, but I like it the best, because in the end, it will be just the glory of God shining on the earth, and how wondrous it will be. All right, next we're going to talk about how our solar system was formed. So we're going to start with this article titled, appropriately, "How Did Our Solar System Form?" or "How Did the Solar System Form?" by Nola Taylor Reid at space.com. It starts out, approximately 4.5 billion years ago, gravity pulled a cloud of dust and gas together to form our solar system. How simple is that? While scientists aren't certain of the exact nature of the process, observations of young stellar systems with computer simulations have allowed them to develop 3 models of what could have happened so many years ago. And believe me, there are actually more than 3 models, but this article covers 3 models. So now we have to remember again, observations of young stellar systems. What they're seeing is nebulas out there, and they are assuming that eventually these nebulas will turn into stars, will collapse and turn into stars with the gravitational and stuff, but they've never actually seen one happen. All right, so this is all conjecture. Now they put that with computer simulations. Now remember, the computer simulations or the computer models all rely on human input into it. So these guys have an end that they want to prove. So the information that they are putting into the models is trying to prove the end point that they're trying to make. So now the first model is the formation models. Okay, scientists have developed 3 different models to explain how planets in and out of the solar system may have formed. The first and most widely accepted model is the core accretion. We actually talked about this earlier. Works well with the formation of rocky terrestrial planets, but have problems with the giant planets. The second, pebble accretion, could allow planets to quickly form from the tiniest material. The third, the disk instability method, may account for the creation of giant planets. So they need the 3 different models to kind of prove their theory, but all these models kind of disprove the other models because our planets aren't all the same, even though they're supposed to have come from the same material and made the exact same way. So how did this happen? So the core accretion model, I'll read this right here a little bit here. With the rise of the sun, the remaining material began to clump together. Small particles drew together, bound by the force of gravity, into larger particles. The solar winds swept away lighter elements, such as hydrogen and helium, from the closer regions, leaving only heavy rocky material to create terrestrial worlds. But farther away, the solar winds had less impact on lighter elements, allowing them to coalesce into gas giants. In this way, asteroids, comets, planets, and moons were created. Now, an article by Jake Hebert, PhD, titled "A New Planet from Cosmic Dust?" reads as such. However, many problems plague this scenario. First, these giant gas clouds are initially so spread out that gravity is insufficient to cause them to begin to collapse. Some other mechanism is needed to begin the gas compression process. The most common proposed trigger for this collapse is the shock wave from an exploding star. But a theory of a star formation that requires stars to already exist isn't much of a theory. Second, the formation process appears to violate a fundamental rule in physics called conservation of angular momentum. Secular scientists have proposed ways to try to get around this problem, but they do not have a convincing explanation. Likewise, it suffers from other theoretical difficulties. Of course, planet formation cannot proceed until all of these hurdles are somehow overcome to produce a new star. So producing a star in the first place is nearly impossible with their models. Third, secular scientists are extremely fuzzy on how dust particles can collide to somehow form larger planetesimals, as dust particles tend to bounce off one another rather than stick together. This is actually alluded to by an astrophysicist interviewed in one of the popular science articles detailing this claim. Quote, little is known about how microscopic dust particles can grow 14 orders of magnitude to become a giant planet. Addition to these difficulties, it should be noted that the direct evidence for planet formation presented by secular scientists is ambiguous. Dusty disks and rings surround many stars, but such disks also surround stars that secular scientists believe to be mature and around which they do not expect new planets to be forming. Plus, we also talked about even if the dust particles were able to clump into larger rock particles, the larger rock particles are moving so fast that for them to clump together and collide, it would break them back apart. There's no possible way for it to actually work in space. So let's go down to the last article on how did the solar system form. We'll go back to that and talk about the disk instability model. So, but the need for a rapid formation for the gas giant planets is one of the problems of core accretion. So, according to models, the process takes several million years longer than the light gases were available in the early solar system. At the same time, the core accretion model faces a migration issue, as the baby planets are likely to spiral into the sun in a short amount of time. So gas planets form really fast in a few million years. Kevin Walsh, a researcher at the Southwest Research Institute in Boulder, Colorado, told Space.com. That creates a time limit because the gas disks around the sun only last 4 to 5 million years. Now remember, they have found these gas disks and particle disks around other suns. So if they only last 4 to 5 million years, suns that they claim already mature and are not creating any more planets, are those suns that young? 4 to 5 million years? Anyways, that's something to think about there. I just thought of that right now. All right, according to a relatively new theory, disk instability, clumps of dust and gas are bound together early in the life of the solar system. Over time, these clumps slowly compact into a giant planet. These planets can form faster than their core accretion rivals, sometime in as little as 1,000 years. All right, you gotta be careful when they talk about years in these long years scenarios. 1,000 years when it comes to 4.5 billion years, that's like a blink of an eye. How on earth are they going to even measure 1,000 years of this happening? Why not say 2,000 years? It's just as much as in a blink of an eye, or 500 years. Or, even if it was 5,000 years, why did they come up with 1,000 years? They've never seen one of these things even happen to even measure the time for it. But here they are actually saying sometimes in as little as 1,000 years. They have no idea. They just threw that out there, allowing them to trap the rapidly vanishing lighter gases. They also quickly reach an orbit stabilizing mass that keeps them from the death marching into the sun, supposedly. So David F. Coppedge calls in his article titled Nebulous Hypothesis, states, in recent years, planetary scientists have been undergoing a kind of religious conversion from the nebular hypothesis to a completely new disk instability hypothesis. Championed by Alan Boss, it postulates that knots in the swirling cloud contract catastrophically to form gas giant planets almost instantly. That's where the 1,000 years comes in. That is almost instantly when you're talking long times. This idea should raise the eyebrows of many who were taught to think planet formation requires millions of years. The new model was proposed less on evidence than on attempts to get around the difficulties. And those difficulties are the giant gas planets on the outer parts of our solar system. All right, pebble accretion. So this also states the biggest challenge to core accretion is time. Building massive gas giants fast enough to grab the lighter components of their atmosphere. Recent research probed how smaller pebble-sized objects fuse together to build giant planets up to 1,000 times faster than earlier studies. I think that had to go, sounds like that is almost going into the disk instability model. All right, so pebble accretion. Now, this is the first model that we know about that you start out with pretty simple structures for the solar nebula from which planets form and end up with the giant planet system that we see. Study lead author Harold Levison, an astronomer of SWRI, told Space.com. So, in the end, it states that the larger objects now tend to scatter the smaller ones more than the smaller ones scatter them back. So the smaller ones end up getting scattered out of the pebble disk. Study co-author Catherine Cray, also from SWRI, told Space.com. The bigger guy basically bullies the smaller ones so they can eat all the pebbles themselves and they can continue to grow up to form the core of the giant planets. Anyways, nice try, pebble accretion, to go there. Now, Also in this article is another model called the Nice model. Now, it was titled Nice because it was named after the city in France, Nice, where they were discussing this. Originally, scientists thought that planets formed in the same part of the solar system they reside in today. The discovery of exoplanets, see, this is the biggest problem, is this discovery of exoplanets, shook things up, revealing that at least some of the most massive objects could migrate. Either that or their whole formation scenario is completely wrong, which it probably is. As the planets interact with smaller bodies, they scatter most of them toward the sun. The process caused them to trade energy with the objects, sending the Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus farther out into the solar system. Eventually, the small objects reached Jupiter, which sent them flying to the edge of the solar system or completely out of it. Now remember, all of this is done in gravity. Movement between Jupiter and Saturn drove Uranus and Neptune into even more eccentric orbits, sending the pair through the remaining disks of ices. Some of the material was flung inward while it crashed into the terrestrial planets during the late heavy bombardment. Other material was hurled outward, creating the Kuiper Belt. So now we have this swirling mass, all controlled by gravity, remind you. Now this gravity is what? Fluctuating, so things can go forward and out. That's what I'm saying. This is completely convoluted and makes absolutely no sense. So this Nice model is really trying to get everything to work together by making it more convoluted, more extremely, I don't know what you want to call it, just out there, trying to get everything to work together. So let's talk about David F. Kopech again. He's a great writer here. His article is titled "Start Over: The Evolution of Planets is All Wrong." And reading this article called "How Did the Solar System Form?" you got to admit that perhaps it is completely all wrong. Let's read what he has to say. But in the mid-1990s, astronomers actually started finding those exoplanets. And they looked nothing like those in our solar system. Gas giants the size of Jupiter whipped around their stars in tiny orbits, where core accretion said gas giants were impossible. Other exoplanets traced out widely elliptical orbits. Some looped around their stars' poles. Planetary systems, it seemed, could take any shape that did not violate the laws of physics. The findings have triggered controversy and confusion as astronomers struggle to work out what the old theory was missing. They are trying ideas, but are still far from sure how the pieces fit together. We just read through a lot of those ideas. The field in its current state doesn't make much sense, says Norm Murray of the Canadian Institute for Theoretical Astrophysics in Toronto. It's impossible right now to account for everything, agrees Kevin Schlafman, an astrophysicist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, I should say, in Cambridge. Until researchers reach a new consensus, they will not be able to understand how our own solar system fits into the grand scheme of things, let alone predict what else might exist. To explain hot Jupiters, for example, that means close to the sun, they suggest that the planets did not stick around at their birthplace in the cold outer reaches of stellar disks. Instead, the infant giants spiraled inwards as viscous gas in the disk slowed their orbits. At some point, for reasons unknown, they stopped their death spirals and settled into stable orbits close to their stars. Despite the extreme temperatures, the giant planets had strong enough gravity to keep hold of their gas. Super Earths also don't fit into the old beautiful theory, and Finkbeiner adds. they are even harder to account for. Meanwhile, researchers continue to nurture their mess of models, which have grown almost as exotic and plentiful as the planets they seek to explain. And if the current theories are disjointed, ad hoc, and no longer beautiful, that is often how science proceeds, notes Murray. Life, he says, is like that. All right, I'd like to end today with a couple of things. First of all, the formation of stars. This is a big problem for evolutionists, even if they don't want to admit it. As I talked earlier about how gas wants to expand and not compress into a star. And for evolution to actually work the same processes with the same outcomes, they have to be consistent throughout the universe. And we've discussed how that is not so. So I'm going to show you guys something and see something to think about. Now, this is a painting that I painted a while ago. Now, you're going to have to take my word for it that I actually painted it, because you never saw me paint this painting. But you'd have to believe in me, and to do that, you'd have to have faith in what I say is true. So I painted this painting. I painted the mountain, the trees, and the brush up in the front. All right? Now, this painting also has a couple other things on it. It has canvas and a wood frame. Now, most people would see a painting like this and say, well, there was a painter. They would see this design and say, well, the painter designed it. There's a designer, a creator, if you will, of this painting. Most people would acknowledge that. You cannot have this painting without someone who created it. But what if you didn't believe there was a creator behind this painting? You would have to come up with a way that this painting came about all by itself. And this process took billions of years. For one thing, you're going to break down every piece of material in this. You're going to break down all the paints to the molecular starting point, beginning. You're going to break down the wood frame, the wood, probably the staples that were used in the wood, down to its molecular structure, and also the canvas. So it would somewhat go like this. Millions of years ago, in fact, you could arbitrarily put a number on it. 6 billion years ago, all these molecules in this wood found each other by gravity and came together, collected together to make wood. Now this wood, after billions of years more, formed into a frame. Now the same process happened with canvas. Billions of years ago, all the molecules got together and created a canvas. And a few billion years later, this canvas collected onto this wood frame. Then all the molecules came together to create a variety of paints. And then with the long ages of time, these varieties of paints attach themselves randomly to the canvas. And what you see here is random chaos that came together. It looks like it was designed, but it's really random chance that this all came together. Now, if you think that's silly, that is exactly how evolutionists claim all of creation came together to work together in a design order. All right? Chaos became order. But what's going to happen to this picture in another, quote, million years from now? Is all of a sudden the tree is going to become alive? What's going to happen to this? It's going to actually break down and return to dust, and no sign of it's ever going to be there. But somehow, millions of years, life finally evolved from nothing, from molecules, from that first Big Bang. So I want you to think about that. If you think this is silly, that this painting could not have come together on its own, sounds ridiculous? Well, put that into perspective of the entire universe, and then eventually life itself, especially human life. Something for you to think about there. Now, I'm going to leave with what David F. Kopich states in the end of his Start Over article. This is all the more aggravating when you remember that secular cosmologists have sold a false scenario for centuries since Laplace, propounded nonstop for decades by artwork, textbooks, and TV documentaries that have used this debunked theory to prop up a molecules to man scenario, supposedly illustrating why science is superior to religion. We'll take Genesis 1:1 any day over this falsified nebulous hypothesis, which is in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. They've had their chance. Give the materialistic storytellers the boot. Earth is a privileged planet in a designed solar system. That is where the evidence leads. Design is evident everywhere, like our own creation. We hold these truths to be self-evident among rational beings on God's green earth. Till next time.